Of the more than 1,000 stories that I've written, this story has always been very special to me. I'm not sure how I will emotionally react while trying to do an audio version of this happening. This incident seems to bother me more today than it did the day it actually happened. I guess because it's raining here and we're under a tornado watch, and that was exactly what was happening 40-something years ago. The baby. When daylight arrived, it was necessary for me to stay off the main streets of Jacksonville, Florida, mainly because I knew that the police were looking for me. On this morning, it was raining very hard, and it was totally black outside. It was making it very difficult for me to move from one location to another. My nights were generally spent in the parks, and during the daytime I would move from one of several abandoned red brick buildings located on Riverside Avenue along the banks of the St. Johns River. I walked through the knee-high weeds and entered the old building from the east side. Stepping over large wooden planks and empty boxes, I began to shake my hands trying to sling some of the water off myself. I was soaked to the bone. I started to unbutton my shirt when I heard someone talking at the other end of the building. I quickly ducked down behind one of the many wooden posts which held the old structure upright. "This is my hideout. What are they doing in here?" I thought to myself as I once again began to listen. "Well, I don't know what we're going to do," screamed a man's voice. All at once, a baby began to cry. With my eyes wide open, I stretched my neck around the side of the large post to see if I could tell what was happening at the other end of the building. The only light coming in from the building was from the outside, and it was dark there. There were many windows, but they were way up high, and a few were broken, but most of them were dirty, blocking out whatever light would come in. It was very hard for me to see anything. "Shut the little bastard up or I'll wring its damn neck," said a man. "Please don't hurt my baby," said a woman's voice. Slowly, on my hands and knees, I moved along the dirty floor, making my way back toward the sounds. The baby cried, and it cried, and it cried. It just would not stop. I stopped and hid behind a stack of old tires when I thought that I was about 30 feet away from where they might be setting. All at once, a flock of pigeons flew across from one rafter to another, causing me to jump. "Who's there?" yelled out a man as he stood up. Carefully, I stood up and faced in his direction. "What are you doing in here?" he asked. "I'm here a lot when I need a place to stay." "Shut the goddamn baby up!" screamed the man to the girl sitting at his feet. Why are you in here with a baby? Ain't you got no place to live?" I questioned. "My baby was born just last night," said the young girl. You had a baby in here?" She nodded her head, telling me yes. "Ain't people supposed to go to the hospital to have a baby?" The man sat back down on the dirty floor, and neither of them said a word. I walked over to where the woman was sitting there holding a baby in her arms. All at once she pulled up her t-shirt, exposing her large breast. "God, I ain't never seen girls' titties that big before. They look like they might bust or something. They're so big," I thought to myself. The woman took the baby and began to nurse it. Even when feeding, the baby kept making funny sounds, sort of like a puppy makes when it's scratching and can't get a flea to stop biting. "Well, we got to get out of here. Feed the damn thing and let's throw it in the river," said the man. The girl reached down and kissed the baby on top of its head. "He really can't mean that. Nobody would throw a little baby in a river, would they?" I thought to myself. I stood there for more than 5 minutes. Neither of them said a word. Finally, I turned around and walked back to my end of the building, and I just sat down in the corner. Now and then I would hear the man yell at the girl, and then all would become quiet once again. It must have been about a half hour before the baby began to cry again. Once again, the man began to scream, trying to shut the baby up. The next thing I knew, the man was walking toward me, holding the baby in his arms. It was screaming at the top of its lungs. He kept walking closer and closer to where I was sitting. Then he stopped directly in front of me and he just stood there staring at me. Quickly, he turned without saying a word and he walked out the side door of the building. I stood up and walked over to the opening, hoping to see what he was going to do. All at once, someone grabbed me on the shoulder. When I spun around, I saw the girl was gasping for air and unable to breathe, and I began slapping her on the back until she could catch her breath. "He's going to kill my baby," she told me. I looked out the large opening and saw the man standing at the edge of the river, but I didn't see the baby in his arms. I ran toward him as fast as I could, and when I reached him, I saw the baby laying on the ground beside him. Out of breath, I sat down on the ground and I opened the dirty towel which was wrapped around the child. I took off my t-shirt and I used spit trying to clean the dried blood off the baby's face and arms. It looked so helpless. Though only 11 years old, I had run away from the orphanage many times in the last 5 years. Traveling the streets and back alleys of Jacksonville, Florida, I had learned much about survival. I knew that one had to be very careful and they had best not get anyone mad at them. I sat there wondering, should I tell the man that I'd call the police if he tried to throw the baby in the river? Surely he would beat me or he'd choke me to death like that one queer guy tried to do several weeks before, I thought to myself. "If you don't want it, can I have it?" I asked the man. "Have what?" "That little baby." "What would you do with a goddamn baby?" he asked me. "I'll take it back to the orphanage with me. It's better to be in the orphanage than to be dead, right?" I blurted out. I could hardly believe that those words came out of my mouth. As bad as the orphanage was, I realized, looking into that baby's face, that being dead was far worse than being molested, mistreated, or going hungry. The man just stood there looking out over the river. I looked up and I saw the girl walking toward him. She walked up behind him, placed her arms around his waist, and the two of them just stood there silently. I stood up. I picked the baby up off the ground and I waited for the man to reply. Slowly, I began to walk backwards into the tall weeds. "Don't you say anything where that baby came from, you hear me, buddy?" said the man. "Yes, sir," I said. I watched the two of them as I continued to walk backwards. When I reached the sidewalk more than 200 yards away, neither of them had even turned around to look at me. I carried the baby over to the city park over by 5 Points and I sat down on a bench for about an hour rocking the baby back and forth. Soon it began to cry and I couldn't get it to stop. I took the baby into a local store and I asked the woman if she had something that I could feed it. As the word spread that I had found a baby lying in the park, a large crowd began to gather. Within 10 or 15 minutes, there were people everywhere. While everyone was looking at the baby, I filled my pockets with candy bars and penny candy from the counter, and then I slipped out the door, and back into the world I traveled.